The darkness settles heavy around us, like a thick velvet blanket, a comforting weight. We are wrapped only in this shimmering halo of warmth. Listen closely now to the gentle, steady breath of the bonfire, a deep sound of relaxation and ancient memory. The cedar logs you piled earlier are smoldering beautifully, collapsing into bright pockets of orange light. Each tiny snap, a small burst of sound, quickly consumed by the night. See the ancient shadows dancing on the periphery, wavering when the golden glow flares high. Feel the deep warmth spreading across your outstretched hands, soothing the chill away. We are safe here, beneath the open sky, with the embers drifting up like tiny, silent messages to the stars. The fire keeps the cold world at bay. Only this soft, hypnotic flicker remains. I am Nasrella, and this is YTChronicle. Sit closer to the fire as we journey into the real first Thanksgiving history, myth versus political deal, Wampanoag Pilgrims. We leave the modern world far behind now, traveling back to a place of deep desperation and cutting cold. It is a world carved out of vast coastal wilderness in the year 1620, a world far removed from the cozy myths we often tell children. This story begins not with a feast, but with suffering, unbearable loss, and the overwhelming smell of salt water mixed with weak wood smoke. Picture the Mayflower, a cramped, weary ship finally anchored after a terrible journey across the endless gray ocean. The Pilgrims, those tired souls seeking their religious freedom, had intended to land much further south, but fate, or perhaps Providence, had guided them to the harsh shores of Patuxet, a place known now as Plymouth. The first winter was simply devastating, a true test of human endurance. The amber light of our own fire here feels like a blessing, a miraculous furnace compared to the meager sparks they must have struggled to maintain against the relentless New England cold. Sickness swept through their small, desperate population like a hungry ghost, consuming the weak and the strong alike. Feel the deep quiet of our own bonfire tonight. Imagine that quiet broken only by the sound of coughing and the constant fear of the unknown. They were dying quickly and systematically. By the time spring finally arrived, half of the original 102 colonists were dead. They were strangers in a barren land, clinging desperately to existence, while unseen eyes watched them from the ancient shadows of the woods. Eyes that had known this land for thousands upon thousands of years. These eyes belonged to the people of the First Light, the Wampanoag. The Wampanoag knew this territory intimately, the forests, the rivers, the rhythms of the sea. Their perspective on this European arrival was complex, born of recent tragedy themselves. They had already endured their own devastating sickness, a plague brought by earlier European traders that had decimated their communities, leaving villages abandoned, fields overgrown. This fire we watch tonight reminds us that loss is universal, that even ancient nations can be brought low by forces beyond their control. The ground the Pilgrims settled on was in fact the recently emptied village of Patuxet, a terrible, stunning irony. The Pilgrims found cleared land, ready for planting, and they called it a miracle, a clear sign of God's favor. But it was a silent testament to the immense loss of the Wampanoag Nation, a hollow space where life had thrived. The critical shift in this history occurred not over a spontaneous celebratory dinner table, but in the intense diplomatic halls of necessity. Massasoit Usamequin, the great sachem of the Pokanoket Wampanoag, understood power and peril better than anyone. He watched the Pilgrims, their numbers dwindling, their desperation palpable. But he recognized that the presence of the English, weak though they seemed, offered a strange, necessary opportunity. He needed allies allies desperately against his powerful rival, the Narragansett, who had been untouched by the devastating plagues that had ravaged the Wampanoag. His enemy was strong, his people were few. The flickering light of the English settlement offered a potential balance of power, a precarious shield against certain doom. The fire glows lower now, its golden core settling into deep, smoldering embers, a perfect time to consider the man who bridged these two worlds. The legend often skips over the depth of the initial political calculation. The Thanksgiving myth focuses on the kindness, the shared food, but the reality began with a political treaty, a pact of mutual defense, a careful calculation of survival by the great Wampanoag leader. It was a deal struck under duress and necessity, not simply friendship. The terms of this treaty, sealed in March 1621, were surprisingly clear and deeply practical, designed to benefit Massasoit and his people first. And foremost, this was not a surrender. It was an alliance built on shared geopolitical fear and the desperate need for security in a suddenly unstable landscape. Let the fire crackle softly as we move deeper into the clauses of this ancient political deal. Listen to the soft snap of the wood one more time before we proceed. Feel the ancient shadows stretch back from the golden glow of the heartwood, now yielding to the flame. A deep amber hue settles over the ground. The cedar crackles, a sharp report against the deep quiet of the night air. Tiny sparks drift upward toward the deep velvet sky, where the first subtle stars begin to pierce the smoke haze. But the warmth is absolute, settling deep into your bones, melting away the day's concerns. We sink deeper into the historical moment. We often imagine a perfect meeting, a simple shared meal, a moment of pure, spontaneous friendship. But the truth, the essential truth, is forged in desperation and cold. Look at the flame, the way it twists and strains against the wood. That reflects the strain of that first year. The 1620 winter decimated the newcomers, the English settlers of Patuxet. Later renamed Plymouth, they were dying of disease, of starvation, of the sheer unforgiving cold. Nearly half their number vanished into the frozen earth. A truly terrifying silence must have hung over their small fort, only the sound of coughs and the slow rhythmic chopping of wood. The fire shows us how quickly hope can turn to smoldering ash. But the Wampanoag Confederacy had themselves suffered terribly. A catastrophic plague known as the Great Dying had swept through their villages, leaving vast empty fields and a massive power vacuum. Their numbers dramatically reduced made them intensely vulnerable to the powerful. Narragansett rivals who had been mostly untouched by the devastating illness. Massasoit, Osamequin, the great sachem, the supreme leader, he observed the weakness of the English, but also their peculiar strength, their weaponry, their steel, and their capacity for sustained violence. He saw an opportunity, not for charity, not for sharing, but for mutual defense, a strategic shield against the growing Narragansett threat. He desperately needed allies, strong allies, even weak ones possessing potent foreign technology. So the spring of 1621 saw the arrival of Squanto, Tisquantum, a Patuxet man stolen years before, returned now a linguistic bridge, a necessary intermediary. He was the shadow walker between worlds. And then the arrival of Massasoit himself to meet the new governor, William Bradford. The air was thick with suspicion, with mistrust, with the silence of two entirely different worlds colliding. They met not in a festive hall, but under the open sky, beneath the watchful gaze of the ancient shadows cast by the great sleeping woods. The fire is hypnotically slow now. The golden glow softens to a deep orange. The agreement that followed was solemn. 6 points of serious political strategy, not friendship or familial bonding. They swore not to injure one another, to punish any who did, and most importantly, to defend the other if attacked by external forces. It was a military and political deal, a necessary treaty signed in the cold light of survival under the ever-present threat of mutual destruction. This strategic alliance was the true groundwork for the harvest celebration months later, a political deal born of necessity, not goodwill. The myth of effortless friendship dissolves in the slow-breathing reality of diplomacy under duress. The fire breathes with us now. The cedar logs have turned to deep red embers, smoldering softly. The deep, hypnotic heat remains, but the vigorous dancing flicker has slowed, allowing the deep quiet of the true history to settle around us. We drift now into the deeper night, contemplating the weighty cost of that first necessary handshake. The shadows deepen, and we remain beside this fire, listening to the quiet snap of history. The sound of the cedar snapping fills the air, a sudden loud crack that releases a fresh wave of that warm, woody scent, enveloping us completely. Feel the deep, profound warmth settle over your shoulders, melting away any remaining stiffness, any lingering tension. Watch the fire. Breathe slowly, softly, drawing the oxygen in, and exhaling that magnificent plume of golden glow that dances on the low-hanging branches above our heads. The embers beneath the newest logs are a mesmerizing tapestry of deep orange and fading red, a gentle, smoldering heart keeping this vigil with us. We were talking about the real beginning of the story, the true nature of that harvest gathering, a reality far removed from the simple tales of sharing and grace we learned long ago. To truly understand that moment, we must travel backward in time, not just to 1621, but back to the desolate, cold shore of 1620, when the ship Mayflower finally dropped anchor. Imagine the absolute darkness surrounding them, far more complete than the ancient shadows our bonfire pushes back now. Imagine the biting cold, the relentless wind carrying the unforgiving chill of the North Atlantic right into their flimsy settlements, built hastily and desperately upon ground that seemed actively hostile. They arrived late, dangerously late, for planting or proper building. They were already exhausted, already weakened by the long, cramped sea journey, the constant rocking, the poor sustenance. Their numbers were terrifyingly fragile. The first winter of 1620. Into 1621 was not just hard, it was catastrophic. The sickness spread like wildfire, though the fire they had then was meager and smoky, offering little defense against the true cold, the deep, bone-aching cold of this strange new world. We sit here comfortably watching the bright life of our generous flame, but those pilgrims watched their own people weaken and die, day after day, week after week. It is estimated that nearly half the original passengers perished before the spring thaw arrived. Think of that staggering loss. Think of the desperation, the profound sense of isolation, the deep spiritual questioning that must have haunted those weary survivors huddled together watching the smoldering ruins of their dreams. Their tiny settlement was a desperate scar on the vast landscape, an intrusion of European vulnerability, facing a wilderness they did not comprehend, and which was utterly indifferent to their suffering. Their food supplies dwindled to nothing but meager grains and whatever fish they could manage to snare in the bitter, freezing waters. They were starving, they were sick, they were dying, and they were completely alone. Or so they thought. But the real history, the history that glows like an amber secret, beneath the surface of the myth tells us they were never truly alone. The golden glow of their weak fires flickering against the dense forest edge was not unseen. The pilgrims may have felt isolated and utterly helpless, but they were in fact being observed, closely watched by eyes that understood this land perfectly, eyes that had been observing the movements of these strange ships and their even stranger occupants for months. The ancient shadows beyond the warmth of their campfires held intelligence and scrutiny.
This land was not empty. It was not a wilderness waiting to be tamed. It was the sovereign territory of the Wampanoag people, a sophisticated, organized nation that had lived, understood, and governed this coastal region for centuries. And the Wampanoag knew everything about the Pilgrims' desperate condition. They knew how many had died. They knew how poor their shelter was. They knew their weapons were failing, and they knew they would not survive the coming summer without intervention. The stage was set, not for a joyful chance meeting, but for a calculated diplomatic engagement, born out of profound weakness on one side and strategic necessity on the other. Keep watching the flicker of our fire. Keep breathing in that deep wood smoke smell, and we will step now across that invisible line into the Wampanoag world. The cedar logs shift, settling deeper into the ash bed, a soft hiss escaping them, a perfect sound for the deepening night air, that coolness resting against your back, while the golden glow pushes it away from your front. The amber light catches the moisture rising from the earth after the day's chill, a little spiral of ancient smoke curling upward to meet the vast black sky above us, filled with stars you rarely see anymore. We spoke of the starving time, that first dreadful winter, where half of those who survived the journey, simply vanished into the cold earth. The myth tells you they were rugged individualists, strong-willed settlers. The reality is they were lost, desperate, and utterly dependent on forces they did not understand. This is where the pivotal figure, Tisquantum, or Squanto, appears. Emerging from the forest shadows like a ghost, he spoke English, a language gained through extraordinary hardship and enslavement, a long, cruel journey that took him across the ocean and back. He was the bridge, a translator, a guide, but also a political agent, working within the interests of the Wampanoag sachem Massasoit. Squanto taught them how to fish, how to hunt, how to plant corn in the fragile sandy soil, using the herring for fertilizer. He brought them knowledge, essential knowledge, wrapped not in friendship, but in a carefully managed exchange of power and necessity. Look how the flames dance now, high and thin, almost mirroring the nervous energy of that first meeting between the English governor John Carver and the powerful sachem Massasoit. It was not a dinner party, it was a negotiation under extreme duress. The terms they agreed upon laid the groundwork for decades of uneasy coexistence. The fire crackles, a sharp snap as the dry wood yields a sudden burst of sparks that rise quickly into the darkness, a brief shower of fleeting golden light. The treaty they signed that day, March 22, 1621, was simple and brutally pragmatic. First, they would not injure each other's people. Second, if any wrong was done, the offender would be sent to the other side for punishment. Third, all stolen goods would be returned. Fourth, they would assist each other in war against common enemies, particularly those Narragansett warriors Massasoit needed, this alliance a buffer against his more powerful neighbors. His agreement with the Pilgrims was not born of charity, but of geopolitical necessity, a temporary shield of muskets and men. Imagine that moment, sitting there beside a small fire in the clearing, the uncertainty, the desperation on both sides, the cold fear in the Pilgrim camp, and the deep calculation in Massasoit's eyes. He watched the settlers die, and he knew this was his moment to capitalize on their weakness before another rival nation did. The smoke drifts lazily across the coals, smelling of sweet maple, a familiar scent of comfort despite the cold history. We explore Squanto became indispensable, a constant fixture. He was the interpreter, the diplomat, the resource manager, without whom the Pilgrims would not have survived the coming spring and summer. But his presence was complex, a double-edged sword that ultimately led to political tensions, even within the Wampanoag leadership, because Squanto was using his unique position for his own gain, leveraging the fear of the English to boost his own status, a dangerous game of shadows and influence that played out directly under the new golden glow of the settlement fires. The months that followed were characterized by this uneasy cooperation, planting, tending, harvesting, all under the guidance of Squanto, all under the watchful ancient shadows of the Wampanoag, who had inhabited this land for thousands of years. They taught them to plant the corn and beans and squash, the three sisters that sustained life. The sun grew warmer, the days grew longer, and the golden light of survival began to shine more brightly on the struggling little settlement. Feel the deep warmth sinking into your shoulders, the quiet, immense peace of this place, where the only sound is the persistent, quiet smoldering of the fire. The flickering light pulls the shadows from the trees and then pushes them back, a slow, endless, hypnotic rhythm. The embers beneath the wood are a deep, steady red, the color of old wine, the color of enduring memory. The earth beneath you is settling down for the long night, and you are safe here by the ancient fire, watching the golden glow fade and strengthen, fade and strengthen. The autumn approached, the harvest arrived, full and bountiful, not simply because of hard work, but because of native wisdom and a strategic alliance that secured their food and their lives. And that harvest, that moment of relief and plenty, set the stage for the gathering we now call Thanksgiving. The wood is turning to ash now, sinking deeper into itself, a quiet mound of glowing warmth, pushing back the endless dark night. A slow, quiet peace descends over the clearing, a perfect blanket of silence, a deep, deep quiet. Just the sound of the crackling wood, drawing you further down, into the still warmth of the bonfire light. The cedar crackles softly now. Listen to that sound, that whisper of burning wood. The fire breathes slow and deep, a living thing right here beside us. Feel the warmth settle across your knees, your chest, that steady, comforting weight against the cool night air. The flame dances upward, a column of molten orange light, chasing the ancient shadows away, but never fully succeeding. They linger just beyond the golden glow, where the forest waits. We settle deeper into this moment, this safe circle of heat and memory, letting the amber embers pulse and fade and pulse. We spoke last time of the Great Treaty, the essential political deal struck in the chill of that uncertain spring of 1621, a pact made not from simple friendship, but from strategic necessity, from mutual fear and need. The Pilgrims, the English settlers, they were still so profoundly vulnerable. You must remember that they were a people halved by the deep, terrible sickness of that first winter. A third of them already buried in the frozen ground, hidden beneath carefully smoothed earth, so that potential enemies would not count their weakness. Look now at the way the light washes over your hands. It is the color of frail hope, but hope underpinned by absolute desperation. Massaslate, Usamequin. Sachem of the Pokanoket Wampanoag knew this weakness. He also knew the growing danger from rival tribes and the silent spreading devastation left by the earlier plagues that had ravaged his own people. The treaty was a fragile shield, a strategic gamble, a promise of mutual defense, a guarantee of cooperation against shared threats. And central to that alliance was one man, one essential soul, who navigated the terrifying space between two worlds, Tisquantum. His name drifts on the smoke, carried by the rising heat. Feel it on your face, that gentle draft of memory. Tisquantum, Squanto, a survivor of enslavement, a traveler who knew the harsh, unforgiving lands of Europe, and yet still held the deep, intricate knowledge of this soil, this coast, this life. He was the bridge, the fragile, necessary connection, and the fire reflects his duality, burning bright, yet always shadowed by loss. The Pilgrims needed to learn, or they would surely perish. They needed to understand the seasons, the tides, the very language of the earth. And Tisquantum was their teacher, appointed by the authority of the Wampanoag leadership to uphold the new alliance. He showed them how to read the clouds, not as a European sailor would, but as a native son of this place, watching for the subtle signs of rain or drought. He taught them the sacred art of planting the corn, the essential life giver, the core sustenance that would determine their fate. He instructed them in the way to heal the earth, forming protective mounds, like small monuments to survival. And crucially, he showed them the necessary ritual of fertilization, using the silvery fish, the herring or alewives, drawn from the streams to enrich the exhausted coastal soil. Listen closely. The fire gives a sharp snap now. That is the sound of effort. The sound of the dry seed cracking open, revealing the promise of life against the harsh reality of the May sun. The settlers spent that spring and summer bent over the ground, their hands blistered, their backs aching, their hope measured stalk by stalk, leaf by fragile new leaf. They were adapting, slowly, painfully, shedding their old ways in the crucible of this new world, forced to acknowledge that their very survival depended not on their European traditions, but on the ancient wisdom shared by the people they had come to settle among. The golden glow of fire reminds us of the endless sun that baked the fields that summer, the relentless effort required just to ensure a meager harvest. They needed the food, they needed the shelter, they needed the security, and they needed the Wampanoag to provide all three. This was not a season of easy friendship. This was a season of focused, grueling labor, overseen by the indigenous instructors, ensuring the political deal would hold, ensuring the new partners would survive long enough to serve their strategic purpose. Watch the sparks fly up now, tiny, bright protests against the dark sky. They are the effort of that year's planting, the desperate prayers of the colonists that the harvest would finally be enough. The fire breathes in and out, a gentle rhythm now, a slow golden glow rising against the black velvet night. You feel the warmth settling deep into your bones. The cedar snaps once, a sharp, quick sound, then silence returns, swallowing the noise, leaving only the softest crackle, a mesmerizing flicker across the rough-hewn logs of the settlement walls. We were speaking of Osamequin, the great sachem, a leader burdened by the shifting alliances of his territory. He watched the newcomers, not just with suspicion, but with a calculating need. His people weakened by the great dying, the terrible sickness brought by earlier ships, a sickness that left villages empty and the spirits of the land restless. The firelight dances on the ancient shadows of the forest edge, where the Wampanoag scouts watched silently, their presence known only by the sudden stillness of the nighttime woods. They saw the pilgrims struggling, their small gardens failing in the strange soil, their numbers dwindling with every harsh winter storm. The embers beneath the main logs are a deep, pulsing red, a steady, hypnotic sight, promising security in the vast, dark wilderness. For the pilgrims, survival was a desperate prayer, their strict beliefs meeting the brutal reality of the new world. They needed the knowledge that only the people of the First Light held, the secrets of planting, of fishing, of enduring the long, cold months. They needed Tisquantum, the man who walked between two worlds, a figure of immense and complex history, captured, enslaved, returned, now essential. Imagine the fear that night, pressed against the pale windows, a fear washed away only by the constant presence of this fire, the warm orange light, spilling out onto the frost-damp ground. The colonists feared the unknown sounds, the rustling leaves, the vastness of the trees reaching up into the starless sky, while Osamequin feared the intentions hidden beneath their thin European clothes, the deeper hunger, the constant search for more land, more power. This arrangement, this crucial political deal, was not born of instant friendship or goodwill. It was a contract of mutual desperation, a truce held together by necessity and the immediate threat of rivals. The Narragansett to the west were powerful, unscathed by the recent plagues, and they watched the weak alliance forming. At Plymouth with interest and malice. Listen closely to the fire. It whispers secrets now, the shifting sands of loyalty. The smell of smoke is heavy and earthy, a scent that links us to that time, to the anxiety that kept both Pilgrim and Wampanoag awake, wondering if the treaty would last until morning. The fire is low now, smoldering gently. The flames have pulled back, settling into the heartwood, leaving the edges bathed in soft amber. Usami Kwan understood that the English were a shield, a temporary defense against his own indigenous rivals. He demanded a strict pledge of assistance. In military conflict, and the colonists Thomas Prince and William Bradford agreed, they needed peace, they needed food, they needed the fire of alliance to keep the ice of extinction at bay. The darkness outside the circle of light is absolute, a reminder of the immense forests that surrounded the tiny Plymouth Rock settlement, a world that belonged entirely to the Wampanoag, where their paths and trails crisscrossed the territory like veins. The Pilgrims were guests, temporary and vulnerable, clinging to the edges of the coast. Watch the way the sparks drift up, rising high above the plume of smoke, disappearing into the cosmic expanse. They are like the prayers and hopes of both groups, tiny, fragile lights lifted into the immense, indifferent sky. The golden glow catches the faint outline of a sleeping child near the hearth, safe for this one night, protected by the strength of the sachem's word. Squanto's role was paramount. His presence assured Osamequin that negotiations would be fair. His lessons taught the colonists how to plant the corn, fish side by side with herring, how to tread lightly on the ancient earth. He was the bridge, the vulnerable connection, and his loyalty was constantly being weighed by both sides, a delicate balance in the smoldering conflict of cultures. The sound of the wood turning to charcoal is a deep, soothing hiss, the fire drawing inward for the long watch of the night. We sit here warm and protected by the ancient fire ritual, contemplating this fragile truce, the difficult political maneuvering that set the stage for the autumn harvest. Not a mythic party, but a strategic declaration, a demonstration of strength and alliance to the watching Narragansett. The fire settles further down into a bed of glowing embers, a deep red hearth, promising quiet, rest. The world outside is entirely silent, save for the occasional soft click of the burning wood, a constant reminder of the gentle, watchful presence of the fire, keeping the long, dark night at bay. The cedar crackles softly tonight, a sound like whispered secrets carried on the low breeze. Feel the deep, persistent warmth of the fire spreading across your chest and shoulders, a shield against the ancient shadows that gather just beyond the reach of the golden glow. We settle deeper into this moment, this silence, watching the flames dance tall and true.
He looked past the strange garments and the pale, thin faces of the newcomers,
the wood is
and saw
now.
only an opportunity.
Turning to rich,
he
dark
saw not
charcoal
allies and
beneath
friendship,
the shield of
but tools
brilliant
against his
orange
powerful
embers.
rivals,
A
the
lone
aggressive
spark
and
drifts
ever-encroaching
upward,
Narragansett
a
to the
tiny,
west.
temporary star,
The fire breathes a
briefly
low hiss,
returning to the universe,
reminding us that even
before
the strongest
dissolving into
alliances
the darkness
are forged in
above
the
the
heat
trees.
of conflict or threat.
We have seen the English
The treaty
pilgrims
established
arrive.
in March of
We have witnessed
1621
their starvation,
was the cornerstone
their utter
of the peace,
reliance on the
a binding
land they
commitment
did
that
not
lasted
understand.
for 50 years.
We saw
Imagine the
Tisquantum,
scene
the
in the
interpreter,
rough settlement of Plymouth,
bridging two
the
vastly
firelight
different
of a different
worlds.
hearth, perhaps,
His knowledge,
flickering
a
on.
currency
The
more
serious
valuable
faces
than
of
any
Governor
gold
Carver
the pilgrims
and
carried.
Massasoit. But the survival of Plymouth was not secured by kindness alone, and it was secured by necessity, by the cold, hard logic of
worldview, a political deal. Massasoit Osaminquin, the great sachem of the Wampanoag, understood balance and power better than any man in either camp.
A military deterrent to ensure their own sovereignty. This was a truce signed in mutual fear rather than mutual affection. The formal agreement itself was both simple and immense. 6 crucial articles hammered out word by slow word by Tisquantum. The first article was clear and direct. No injury shall be done to any of their people by any of ours. A simple rule, yet a difficult promise to keep between people who held such deep mistrust. The second, if any injury is done, the offender must be sent to the injured party for punishment, a terrifying concept for the English, used to their own rigid laws. The third article centered on stolen goods, requiring immediate restoration and punishment for the offending party, a measure to ensure trust in commerce. The fire snaps, a sharp sound like the seal being pressed onto that long-forgotten document. The amber light washes over the memory of the moment, revealing the solemn weight of the agreement. The fourth article spoke of vigilance. When the Wampanoag came to Plymouth, they were to leave their bows and arrows behind, a painful surrender of immediate self-defense, a clear demand for trust. And the final 2 articles formed the bedrock of the military alliance. The 5th article decreed that if any nation unjustly warred against the English, the Wampanoag shall aid them without hesitation. The 6th article mirrored the 5th. If any nation unjustly warred against the Wampanoag, the English would likewise aid them. A mutual defense pact, binding them together. A fragile rope of shared risk. Look closely at the dancing light, the way the flames twist and turn, revealing these intricate details, these forgotten politics. This was the true beginning of the famous peace, a carefully orchestrated political arrangement, not a simple gesture of goodwill. The warmth on your face is steady now, a calm reassurance that we are safe here, far from the struggles of 1621. We watch the embers glow, a steady red, beneath the white ash, a perfect state of smoldering, quiet readiness. The Wampanoag knew the land. The English knew survival. They were bound by this contract under the watchful eye of the changing seasons and the vast forest. They had forged a deal, but the true test of this treaty lay ahead, not in the signing, but in the living, in the difficult day-to-day interactions where mistrust could ignite into conflict at the slightest spark. The scent of burning wood deepens, a grounding fragrance, pulling us further into the atmosphere of the past. The cedar crackles softly, a warm counterpoint to the deep growing darkness. Look how the firelight stretches the shadows long and thin behind the birch logs. The air cools now that the sun has truly set, but the amber heart of our fire holds steady. We left the treaty newly signed in March of 1621, a brittle promise etched not in stone, but in mutual desperation. The English needed guidance, protection, and knowledge of the land. Massasoit, Osamequin, needed a strategic ally against the rising threat of the powerful Narragansett. The English represented weakness, but also a potential shield of firepower and political maneuvering. The seasons turned swiftly under the great golden glow of the sun. The spring mud dried, the summer heat pressed down. Tisquantum, or Squanto, taught them where to fish, how to net the herring, how to manure the fields. He showed the pilgrims the ancient rhythm of planting corn. 3 kernels together, with a fish head for nourishment, buried deep in the earth. The pilgrims followed this strange new ritual, trusting the instruction of the Patuxet Saliver. They were slow learners, stubborn people, clinging to their European ways, but they adapted enough to survive. The fire snaps sharply, sending a small plume of bright white smoke curling upward. Watch that tiny spark drift free before it vanishes in the night air. That small spark represents the fragility of their existence that year. The harvest arrived meager, but not entirely absent, enough to promise some sustenance through the coming merciless New England winter. Governor William Bradford decreed a time of rejoicing once the harvest was finally gathered, a necessary pause after months of grueling labor, disease, and death. The Pilgrims planned military drills, a show of force and skill. They would fire their muskets in celebration of their survival. Imagine the loud booms echoing across the water, across the forest floor, a sound that shattered the peace of the early autumn air, a noise like thunder.
Triumphant noise meant only for the small village, but the forest listens to all sounds. It was that celebratory booming sound that drew Massasoit Usamequin and his people to Plymouth Plantation. The English were holding a military exercise. They were firing muskets repeatedly. Was the treaty broken? Was this an attack? Under the cloak of ancient shadows, 90 Wampanoag men, led by the sachem, arrived. 90 warriors, not 7 or 10 diplomatic messengers. A strong armed force responding to the sound of war. The English feast of thanks suddenly became a moment of extreme tension. They were outnumbered, dramatically outmatched.
There were barely 50 survivors left in the whole plantation. Their small celebration of survival was now a sudden diplomatic crisis. The sudden flicker of nervousness in the small village must have mirrored the quick pulse of the fire when a new log is suddenly added. Massasoit and his men remained for 3 full days. The English were required by necessity, by treaty, by fear, to extend full hospitality. The provisions they had so meagerly gathered for their own winter stores began to vanish rapidly. The warmth of the fire here is the warmth they had to share. The food was divided, the meager stores, stressed. It was not a planned friendship dinner arranged for weeks. It was a sudden, unplanned convergence of necessity and politics under the golden glow of the autumn sun. The fire settles now into a deep red smoldering core, a memory preserved in the ember light. 90 guests arriving unexpectedly, demanding hospitality. It was a strategic necessity, a political deal played out over shared game and boiled corn. We let the warmth soak in, watching the sparks drift higher toward the black velvet sky. The fire tells us to wait, to rest, before we witness the true events of that unplanned gathering. The glow fades slightly, the deep amber color consuming the last bits of wood. We watch the smoke rise slowly, slowly, like a deep, slow breath. Rest now with the smell of the smoke and the soft hiss of the burning cedar. The night holds us in its quiet embrace. The fire breathes deep tonight, a slow, steady rhythm, pushing back the cold shadows. Feel the heat settle heavy and warm on your shoulders, a blanket of ancient comfort. The cedar logs are singing, a low, crackling song, their wood sighing deeply as the flame consumes the dry bark. A few small sparks drift lazily upward, tiny golden messengers, fading into the vast dark ceiling above us. We sit closer now, wrapped in the deep amber glow, continuing our journey into that fragile year of 1621. We spoke of the treaty last time, the great promise of peace, forged not entirely from kindness or friendship, but from stark mutual necessity. That necessary truth is warmed by our fire tonight, its reality clear in the flickering light. Massasoit Usamequin, the great sachem, he was an exceptionally strategic mind. He walked that delicate line of leadership seeing the weakness in the newcomers, the sickness that had ravaged their settlement, the desperation for food, and true knowledge of the land. But he also saw the fearful power of their technology, their metal tools, their strange booming weapons that spat fire and death from a distance.
He calculated the risk, a heavy weight of responsibility sitting on his shoulders. He needed this alliance, this fragile shield against the constant looming threat of the Narragansett. He stood by the agreement he made with Governor Carver and later Governor Bradford, honoring the terms, a testament to his word. Deeply held principle of the Wampanoag way of life, the golden light of our bonfire reflects that honor, that serious intent. The Pilgrims themselves viewed the arrangement through their own narrow lens of divine providence. They saw the treaty as an undeniable sign of God's favor, a miracle that allowed them to survive the terrible first winter and hold their tenuous ground in this wild alien place. But even with the treaty signed, trust remained a scarce currency. The deep cultural gulf between the Wampanoag and the newcomers was wide and vast. Misunderstandings were inevitable, small irritations that grew like
weeds in the spring soil. Imagine the tension in the air during those first months of spring planting after the initial treaty was signed. Squanto, Tisquantum, moved constantly between the two worlds, his own motivations complex and often shaded by the darkness of his past enslavement and loss. He interpreted and translated, he taught and guided, but he also held power, an immense power derived solely from language and knowledge. He taught them how to plant corn with fish heads to enrich the starved soil of Patuxet, which they now called Plymouth. He showed them the best places to find game and the routes of the rivers. We watch the fire, now a slow, hypnotic flicker, tracing the ancient shadows, dancing just at the edge of the light. The Pilgrims were nervous, constantly nervous. Their paranoia was a heavy cloak wrapped around them, reinforced by their rigid faith. They feared betrayal. They feared the darkness of the forest. They feared the unknown intentions of every native who approached their settlement's crude palisade. Every sound in the wood, every distant hoot, every unexpected appearance of Wampanoag hunters brought a fresh wave of anxiety crashing into their carefully ordered world. The agreement was political. It was a military defense pact, but it was not yet true fellowship or easy peace. It was a cold calculation, warmed only slightly by the rising sun of spring. The fire snaps sharply now, a sudden explosion of sound from a piece of wet wood. Listen to that quick, sharp burst of heat and energy. The Wampanoag, too, felt the strain. They saw the Pilgrims slowly building their defenses, making their strange large houses, filling their small fort with more settlers, arriving with every ship that risked the Atlantic crossing. They questioned how long these hungry, aggressive newcomers would truly honor the bounds of the agreement when their own numbers grew stronger. The sachems of the surrounding tribes watched Usamequin closely, questioning his judgment. Was this alliance with the weak English really worth the risk of provoking the mighty Narragansett? Our fire glows deepest red now, a slow, smoldering ember promising a quiet warmth. It was this environment of uneasy calculation, this atmosphere of necessary political maneuvering, that led to the event we now mistakenly call the First Thanksgiving. It was never intended as a day of thanks in the Puritan sense, but rather a display of military strength and political bonding. The golden light pulses a gentle invitation to relax deeper. The sound of the wood shifting, settling deeper into the quiet night. Listen closely to that soft, insistent hiss as the sap escapes the burning pine. The golden glow dances against the rough bark of the trees, standing silent watch. We left Massasoit, Osamequin, having made a profound and difficult choice. An alliance born not of friendship or shared belief, but of cold necessity. A political deal etched in the smoke rising from our own fire right now. Feel the intense warmth spreading across your shins, a comfort against the deepening chill. The Pilgrim settlement of Plymouth was small, barely a breath against the vastness of the Wampanoag world. They had survived that first horrific winter, only 44 souls remaining, clinging to the edge of the continent.
and their survival hinged entirely upon the Wampanoag guidance, upon the corn planted, upon the fish caught. Massasoit looked at them not as friends, but as potential tools, as potential buffers against the aggressive Narragansett to the west. He played a long, strategic game, a calculated risk, shimmering like the heat haze above the ancient shadows near us. The agreement was made in March, and by September of 1621, the first meager harvest was gathered. Imagine the relief, that soft, deep sigh of thankfulness that the famine was broken. The Pilgrims planned a small harvest feast, 3 days of rest and celebration. They were celebrating survival, not religious doctrine, just the sheer luck of having lived long enough to reap what Tisquantum had taught them to sow. The men went out hunting, bringing back fowl, wild turkey, and perhaps ducks that swam in the dark, quiet ponds. And then came the military element that truly defines the event. That changes it from a small prayer meeting into a massive political demonstration. Governor Bradford ordered a volley of muskets fired, a standard celebration practice of the time, the thunderous boom echoing across the water, across the untouched forest. It was meant to be joyous, but the sound carried a threat, a declaration of weapons, a statement of power, even if unintended. Massasoit heard those shots. He felt the tremor of the earth, and his political mind activated instantly. A large armed force was required to investigate, to ensure the treaty was not being broken, to show equal respect. Perhaps equal skepticism. And so he arrived, not alone, not with a small delegation, but with 90 men strong, 90 warriors surrounding the frail walls of Plymouth Plantation. The fire crackles now, almost whispering secrets in the smoldering dark. See the slow decay of the logs, turning from bright orange wood to deep red ember. The Pilgrims, barely 50 people total, including women and children, were suddenly faced with 90 armed Wampanoag guests. A tense situation indeed, requiring immediate diplomacy and resourcefulness. They had planned for a 3-day feast of thanks, but they had to quickly provision for nearly double their population for several more days. Massasoit, understanding the strain upon their meager resources, sent his own men out hunting. They brought back 5 enormous deer, a gesture of reciprocity and power sharing. And so the feast began, a chaotic, unplanned convergence of 2 worlds, observing each other across a vast cultural gulf. The Pilgrims offered their roasted fowl, their barley bread, their small store of vegetables. The Wampanoag shared venison, cooked perhaps over fires much like ours right now. They sat together, eating, watching, listening, studying the movements of the other side. This was not a harmonious gathering. Of neighborly thanksgiving, it was a tense political summit disguised as a feast of survival. The light of our bonfire throws deep shadows on the ground, repeating the ancient drama. The smoke drifts lazily into the quiet air, carrying the scent of cedar and old memory. Feel the faint pressure of the warmth on your chest, relaxing your breath, drawing it out slow and steady. The amber light holds the image of Massasoit, a leader making the best deal possible for his people against the relentless tide of history. He knew the true cost of their new neighbors, cost that would become unbearably clear only decades later. But for those 3 long days of November 1621, there was a truce, a fragile, shared moment of necessity. The flicker of the fire, the distant hoot of an owl, the peace of the quiet night, slowly, slowly wrapping around us, deepening the stillness of your mind, slowing the rhythm of your heart. We drift now further into the night, the smoldering light holding the secret of that first gathering, the first political deal. Just listen to the quiet snap of the wood turning to ash, soft and low and calming. The golden glow softly fades at the edges of your sight, letting the rest of the world grow distant and unimportant. Just the sound of the crackling fire, a deep, steady rhythm for your rest. Let the heavy eyelids soften and droop now, drifting, drifting deeper. The cedar log sighs and splits, a gentle crackle. The fire breathes deep, an orange breath stretching across the dark ground. Feel the sudden warmth bloom against your cheek, turning the air soft and heavy. We sit here sheltered by the ancient shadows that lean in from the surrounding forest. The story continues to unfold in the golden glow of the embers. Last time we spoke of the pact, the promises etched not on paper alone, but into the very landscape of these two peoples, the newcomers and the Wampanoag. Massasoit Osamoquin had risked everything to forge that bond, a political necessity, not a moment of instant friendship. The English were weak, struggling, dying, but they held a power that Massasoit desperately needed, a shared enemy, the rival Narragansett to the west. Watch the smoke curl lazily upward, carrying the scent of pine and burning oak. It is a soothing rhythm, a reminder that time here moves differently. It moves with the quiet persistence of the smoldering ash. The amber light paints streaks on the rough wood of the benches where we rest. Listen closely to the tiny hiss as sap escapes the wood and turns instantly to steam. It is the sound of history being burned away, leaving only the essential truth, the truth of survival in that unforgiving year of 1621. The early summer arrived slowly, reluctantly. The pilgrims, known as the newcomers, struggled to plant. They knew European crops. They did not know the sandy soil of Patuxet. They did not know the way the sun burned down here. They leaned entirely upon the knowledge offered by the Wampanoag, or rather the specific and strategic knowledge offered by Tisquantum. Tisquantum, who had lived among the English, who spoke their language. Tisquantum, whose very existence was a tragedy of kidnapping and return. He became the indispensable interpreter, the guide, the cultural bridge. He taught them where to place the fish fertilizer in the cornhills. He showed them the pathways of the deer, the best spots for eel weirs. Watch the fire flicker low for a moment, then catch itself, snapping back into life. That sudden change reflects the tenuous position of the colony. One wrong move, one moment of misunderstanding, and the flame would die. Governor Bradford understood this fragile dependence. He watched Tisquantum closely, knowing that such a powerful middleman held immense influence. The Wampanoag brought deer, venison. They shared their bounty, not out of limitless generosity, but to ensure the newcomers survived. A weak ally is no ally at all against the powerful Narragansett threat. The shadows grow long now, pushed back only slightly by the steady golden glow. Feel the communal warmth radiating outward, a sense of safety. Only found when gathered. This uneasy alliance was forged in the heat of political necessity. It was a transaction of power and knowledge. Massasoit gave his protection and knowledge. Tisquantum gave the language. The pilgrims offered their shaky military strength and the threat of their muskets, each side needing something the other reluctantly possessed. The days stretched into weeks, the weeks into months of cautious learning. The deep warmth of the fire is constant tonight, just as the anxiety must have been constant in those early settlement days. Imagine the sound of unfamiliar tools chopping wood, the strange sound of English prayers drifting across the clearing, and the Wampanoag observing patiently from the edges of the forest, where the firelight barely touched. They measured the newcomers' strength. They assessed their capability. They watched the pilgrims stumble and rise. Sometimes a log shifts, falling deeper into the pit, sending a spray of light sparks spiraling upward. These small embers climb toward the vast, silent blackness of the night sky. They're like small hopes, small chances, rising above the difficult reality. The harvest was approaching. The work had been grueling, the struggle against starvation relentless. The English had planted corn, beans, and squash. The yields were modest, barely enough to sustain them through the coming winter, but it was a success, a momentary reprieve from death that first year. Bradford knew they had to show gratitude. They needed to fulfill the ritual of thanks central to their European culture, and perhaps more importantly, they needed to affirm the bond with their necessary ally. Massasoit was observing. He needed to see that the English respected the terms and the spirit of the peace. The thought of a joint celebration began to take shape. Not the picture-perfect gathering remembered in schoolhouses, but a necessary political demonstration of stability and mutual respect, a showing of force to their enemies, the Narragansett. Listen to the steady, soft roar of the fire, the breath of the wilderness at night. It lulls us deeper into the truth of the event. This gathering was about survival, about power, about securing the future. It was not yet the myth of harmony. It was the reality of a political deal solidified with shared food. The planning began in the crisp air of early autumn. The scents of wood smoke and ripening corn mingled in the cool New England air. The Pilgrims began to gather the small bounty they had achieved: wildfowl, ducks, geese, and perhaps some small deer. They prepared their rudimentary shelters for the impending cold. The fire settles into a deep red glow now, a perfect bed of coals. This deep heat holds the memory of all the hard work that came before the sharing. It reminds us of the true price of that first harvest and the vital importance of the alliance brokered in the spring. The fire whispers softly now, a deep, steady crackle in the cold November air. The flames curl inward, heavy with the scent of pine smoke and dry earth. You feel the deep heat radiating outward, warming the very marrow of your bones. It is a hypnotic sound, a slow, rhythmic breath of golden light, drawing you deeper into the ancient shadows that gather just beyond the reach of the firelight. Watch the sparks drift upward like tiny ascending stars, briefly visible against the vast, inky canvas of the night sky. We were speaking of the fragile nature of the treaty, that tentative handshake between Massasoit Osamequin, the powerful sachem, and the struggling newcomers. It was not born of friendship or mutual understanding, not yet. It was born entirely of necessity, a cold, hard political calculation made under the intense pressure of survival. The amber glow of the fire reflects the intensity of that moment in 1621. Massasoit looked west and saw the rising power of the Narragansett Nation, their ancestral rivals, a powerful, looming threat ready to consume his already weakened Wampanoag people. He needed an unpredictable deterrent, a buffer state, a group that, while strange and sickly, possessed powerful muskets and a terrifying disregard for dying. He saw the Pilgrims not as neighbors, but as tools, sharp weapons to stabilize his eastern flank. The deal he struck with Winslow and Bradford was a desperate gamble, a strategic masterstroke disguised as charity. He agreed to non-aggression, to trade, and most crucially, to mutual defense. This fire tonight holds the memory of that calculation, a slow burn of strategic maneuvering. Meanwhile, the Pilgrims themselves were barely clinging to life. They were ghosts. The smoldering remnants of their first winter still lay heavily at Almer settlement. The common house had been a hospital, a hospice, and a morgue, all in one cold, leaky structure. Half of them had perished in that terrible sickness. Time, half the original company, simply vanished into the harsh reality of the new world. The first harvest was a meager thing, heartbreakingly small. A few baskets of corn, a handful of beans, certainly not enough to carry them through another winter without severe rationing. The settlers knew they were under watchful eyes, constantly observed by the surrounding nations, who wondered how long these pale, sickly newcomers would last before the land swallowed them whole. The desperation fueled their diplomacy. They needed security, they needed information, they needed food. But more than anything, they needed the permission to stay, to plant their roots even shallowly in this new, unforgiving ground. They knew they could not survive the next winter if they alienated Massasoit, if they turned that pragmatic ally into a vengeful enemy. The flicker of the flames reminds us that every decision they made, every interaction, was life or death. It was a time of extreme vulnerability for both groups, the Wampanoag facing internal decay and external threat, the English facing utter collapse. They sat across from each other, not as equals, but as two forces recognizing the immediate, terrible utility of the other. The firelight catches the intricate patterns of the cedar bark burning, it slowly melting into soft gray ash, and you can almost hear the whispered tense translations of Squanto, bridging two worlds, neither of which fully trusted the other. It was a political marriage of inconvenience, sealed not with a celebration, but with a shared glance of fear and exhaustion, a deep recognition of mutual weakness. The peace established in March had to be maintained through the lean months of summer and the crucial time of harvest. The golden glow wraps around you, a warm blanket pulling you further into the quiet history of that difficult year. A history defined by hunger and hope. The sound of the cedar snapping, sharp and sudden, a tiny explosion of heat and light. Feel the warmth move closer now, pulling the golden glow across your knees, where the night air seeks to cool the skin. Ancient shadows dance beyond our circle, mimicking the movement of the flames, long fingers stretching and receding as the dry wood turns slowly to white ash. It was a delicate balance, this treaty signed that spring, a matter of survival more than true belief. Massasoit had faced a terrible choice. The devastating plague had left. His people thin, his dominance challenged by the strong Narragansett to the west, a rising threat against the fragile structure of the Wampanoag Confederacy. He looked at the small group of Patuxet survivors and the English settlers huddled in their thin houses, and saw not friends, but tools, a necessary shield, a buffer state against a far greater enemy. Watch the sparks lift high into the blackness, tiny, fleeting stars carried up by the rising heat. They drift, then vanish into the vast cold sky. The English, they understood hunger intimately, the fear of the coming winter, the gnawing absence of safety, but they did not understand the land, the deep history, the spirits that dwelled beneath the very soil they sought to claim. Their dependence on Squanto, was absolute. His translation, his knowledge of the maize fields, the fishing weirs, the hidden paths, all critical keys to their continued breath. But dependence breeds resentment, and Massasoit knew that this mutual necessity, this political pact, was merely a temporary scaffolding holding up two very different worlds. The fire hisses softly as a pocket of sap explodes, a whisper of steam dissolving instantly. The warmth of the fire is a comfort, a powerful presence, reminding us that light always pushes back the dark, even if only for a short time. Imagine the leader sitting, perhaps near a fire just like this one that long ago autumn, the air heavy with the scent of roasted meat, and the unspoken tension of two cultures, knowing they could not trust, yet knowing they could not separate. Did they look into the flames, trying to read the future in the dancing light? Did they see the centuries of conflict, the eventual erosion of the Wampanoag Way, the ultimate betrayal that lay hidden beneath the surface of the peace they had engineered? No, they saw only the present, the harvest secured, the immediate threat contained, the amber glow promising one more night of security, one more season of fragile existence. The smoldering logs sink deeper into themselves, settling into a rich red bed of embers, a perfect hypnotic carpet of heat. The real first Thanksgiving was not a simple harvest festival of friendship. It was the calculated public display of an essential political alliance. Massasoit asserting his power, using the English presence to demonstrate strength to his rivals, and the English settlers cementing their foothold, securing the survival that hunger had nearly stolen from them. Breathe deep now. The air is cooler on the intake, warming slightly as you exhale. The great sachem needed Plymouth as much as Plymouth needed him, a shared necessity forged in the crucible of disease and war, the very definition of a political deal. Let your mind drift, following the thin stream of smoke, winding slowly upward, losing itself in the deep velvety darkness of the ancient shadows, waiting just beyond the flicker of the flame. We sit here now by this fire, watching the golden glow fade toward. We sit here now by this fire, watching the golden glow fade toward the quiet red of the ember bed, pondering the immense weight of that alliance, a heavy silence settling around us as the narrative slows and the night deepens further into history that is still unfolding. The low hiss of the cedar log settled deep in the pit, a soft smoldering sound now, the crackle receding slightly, leaving only the deep warmth that spreads across your knees, a slow golden glow washing over the worn leather of your boots. Feel the amber light flicker. It dances on the wall of the lodge behind us, where ancient shadows stretch and shrink, a peaceful ebb and flow of light against the deep velvet night. This fire protects us now. It keeps the chill of the Massachusetts autumn at bay, a steady, quiet heartbeat of heat. We watch the embers drift upward, tiny glowing constellations rising on the breath of the smoke before vanishing into the black ceiling of the sky. We return now to that strange, uneasy meeting, the 3 days of shared survival. We spoke of the true purpose of the 1621 harvest celebration. It was not a simple thank you prayer. It was a public performance of power and alliance. Massasoit Usamakwen, the great sachem, he did not come just to eat venison and wildfowl. He came to reaffirm the Treaty of Peace, a fragile document signed that spring, born out of necessity, not friendship. He needed the Pilgrims as a buffer against the powerful Narragansett rivals. The Narragansett had not been touched by the Great Dying Plague, and their strength was immense. Massasoit watched Bradford, and Bradford watched Massasoit, both leaders acutely aware of the risk they were taking. The golden glow of our fire reminds me of the fire pits that burned outside the settlement walls, then where the Wampanoag warriors made their camps, 90 men strong. A significant show of force, a subtle pressure on the 70 or so remaining Pilgrims. The air must have hummed with unspoken tension, even as they shared the roasted turkey and the plentiful deer brought by Massasoit and his men. The deer, a crucial offering, a diplomatic gift ensuring reciprocity. Listen to the subtle snap of the burning wood, a quiet pop that quickly subsides into the deep warmth. Think about the taste of that time. No pumpkin pie.
No cranberry sauce. The Pilgrims had not mastered wheat for true bread yet. They ate corn and wild seafood, cod, eel, clams, mussels, gathered from the rich shoreline. The Wampanoag brought sophisticated dishes, ground nuts, dried berries, smoked fish, saga meat, a kind of corn porridge, often mixed with meat or fat. The fire crackles softly now, a single vein of resin catching light. The light catches the smooth bark of the cedar. See how the warmth penetrates your clothing, settling deep in your bones. It was the Wampanoag who taught the newcomers how to survive, how to plant the corn. Fertilizing it with herring fish heads. They were the teachers, the providers.
Yet the Pilgrims saw themselves as the chosen people. Their journals reflect this unwavering belief, a dangerous mix of dependency and spiritual arrogance. The golden glow of the fire catches a tiny spark that lifts and dies quickly, like a forgotten moment in history. We are drawn closer to the flames, searching for the true narrative, lost beneath centuries of myth-making. Massasoit sitting near the cooking fires, his men vigilant. The days were filled with hunting and military displays. The Pilgrim men shot their muskets, a loud, booming sound across the harbor. Was this celebration, or was it military exercise, a necessary flexing of muscle for both sides? The ancient shadows shift on the ground around us, the fire breathing slowly now, a deep, warm inhalation of the wood. The wood settles deep into the grate, a slow collapse of burning timber, sending a rush of orange light leaping high into the air, momentarily banishing the oppressive shadows that wait just beyond the periphery of our golden circle. Feel the velvet warmth spreading across your cheekbones as the cedar snaps once more, sending up a small shower of golden motes against the vast curtain of the night sky. These ancient shadows stretch long and thin, mimicking the pines that ring our little clearing. The quiet understanding forged between Governor Bradford and Massasoit was a fragile thing, built on desperation, on mutual threat, on shared uncertainty. The Wampanoag needed the alliance to counter their stronger Narragansett rivals, and the Pilgrims needed the alliance simply to survive the terrible sickness that ravaged their first winter. This treaty was a lifeline for both sides, but a political calculation above all else. But the ships kept coming. The relief that followed. The 1621 harvest celebration was short-lived, replaced by the slow, heavy weight of demographic reality. Each new arrival, each new face, each new footprint upon this unfamiliar shore represented a growing appetite, a hunger for land that the Wampanoag could feel tightening around the edges of their traditional hunting grounds. Watch the dying ember drop from the main log, tumbling down into the ash pit, where it rests still bright, smoldering intensely, a miniature sun fading slowly, like the memory of that initial easy welcome. The peace began to fray, not through open warfare, but through the silent creeping. Advance of ownership. The English concept of land ownership was a sharp wedge, a cruel instrument that cut against the Wampanoag worldview. For Massasoit and his people, land was not a commodity to be bought and sold or fenced off behind splintered wood. Land was life, shared, respected, utilized by all living creatures within the seasonal cycles. The settlers did not see the trails, or the seasonal plantings, or the spiritual connection. They saw only empty space, waiting to be possessed, waiting to be carved up into neat rectangular farms that pushed ever closer to the Wampanoag villages, pressing them further inland away from the vital coastal resources. The flickering amber light dances across the rough bark of the logs. The faint scent of cedar and pine resin rises on the heated air, a warm, heavy blanket settling over us. Let the heavy darkness cradle you. Let the low murmur of the fire be the only companion to these thoughts, these heavy realizations about what happens after the feast is over, after the gratitude fades away. The land cessions began as minor gestures, then became inevitable demands. The very success of the Pilgrims meant the steady diminishment of Massasoit's territory. He had traded immediate safety for long-term vulnerability, a choice born of necessity, but one that planted the seeds of future conflict deep beneath the soil of Patuxet. The political balance was shifting inexorably. As the Pilgrims grew stronger, healthier, and more numerous, Massasoit's initial strategic advantage evaporated. He became less a crucial ally and more an inconvenient neighbor whose continued goodwill was now only sought when new resources or land titles were required. Listen closely to the fire now, a low, crackling whisper, like dry parchment being slowly folded, a sound that echoes the quiet erosion of trust. Silent breaking of promises unspoken, within the formal terms of the treaty. The settlers relied less and less on Massasoit's counsel, turning instead to their own laws, their own growing military strength, their own belief in their divine right to this new world. The golden glow warms your hands gently. Feel the residual heat seeping into your palms, a deep, comforting sensation, while the cool night air kisses the back of your neck. The reality of the first Thanksgiving was that the shared meal did not erase the fundamental differences in culture, in law, in aspiration. It merely paused the inevitable confrontation, a brief flicker of hope before the ancient shadows of misunderstanding returned to shroud the future. Massasoit watched these developments with profound unease, understanding that the future he secured for his people was increasingly defined by the encroachment of these foreign ways, these iron tools, these unquenchable needs that expanded with every passing season, demanding more timber, more water, more earth. The smoldering logs sink lower, drawing us deeper into the silence of the woods, the narrative of strained peace continuing its long drift into the quiet hours of the night, a night filled with ancient history and the weight of untold stories. The wood shifts, a low groan escaping the heart of the fire. A rush of hot air blooms toward you. It carries the scent of cedar and old smoke. You are wrapped tight in the amber light. The fire is our clock, our witness, our only companion tonight. Look how the flames dance. They reach high, then shrink low, a constant breath of heat against the chill air. Ancient shadows flicker on the rough stone wall behind us. They stretch and distort the history we unfold together. The year is 1621, the summer harvest complete. A rare bounty, achieved not by pure luck, but by necessity. Massasoit had ensured his people, the Wampanoag, taught the newcomers. They shared the secrets of this land, the earth that fed them both. The Pilgrims struggled still, but they survived. The second brutal winter was avoided. The political necessity of the 1621 treaty still held fast, a delicate, brittle peace secured by mutual need. The Governor, William Bradford, decreed a day of celebration, a feast, a time of military muster and thanks. But understand this, listener, it was not a purely joyous affair. It was a declaration of permanent settlement, a show of strength to any other tribes observing from the edges of the forest. The Pilgrims needed to signal their newfound stability. Listen closely now to the fire. Hear the dry, sharp snap of a burning branch. A shower of bright orange sparks lifts high toward the dark canopy. They vanish, swallowed by the night like forgotten memories. Bradford organized a parade of sorts. Their small company of 50 colonists, men, women, and children, their numbers tragically diminished. They marched with muskets loaded, a show of force to acknowledge their harvest success. They fired their weapons repeatedly into the crisp autumn air. This noise, this loud percussive claim on the land, it echoed far into the territories of the Wampanoag. Massasoit, Hobomog, Squanto, and many others heard the distant sounds. They heard the constant volleys of English gunpowder. The Wampanoag chief grew instantly suspicious. Was this a celebration or a signal of war? Was the fragile treaty already broken? Had the English decided to attack now that they felt strong enough? Massasoit gathered nearly 90 warriors, 90 of his strongest men. They moved silently through the pine and oak forests, traveling towards Plymouth Plantation. They arrived not as invited guests, but as a defensive force, a large contingent of armed Wampanoag arriving unannounced. The Pilgrims saw them approaching, a sudden influx of armed native men. The golden glow of our fire seems to dim for a moment, reflecting the tension. The air thickens with uncertainty. Bradford and his remaining men prepared for conflict. The original intention of their feast, of their musket firing,
it had been misinterpreted by the very allies they sought to impress. Massasoit met Bradford outside the fort walls. The air crackled like dry tinder. The two leaders spoke not of thanks or charity, but of the loud noise, the show of arms. Massasoit demanded to know why they were firing so many guns. Was this the beginning of the end of the peace? Bradford assured him, through Squanto's careful translation, that it was merely a traditional English way of celebrating abundance, a harvest tradition. But Massasoit remained wary. 90 warriors do not travel miles simply to witness a strange celebration. They came prepared to defend their treaty, their people, their land. The embers deep within the bonfire pulse red now, a steady heartbeat beneath the flame. Feel the warmth on your cheek. The history
of this moment is built entirely on misunderstanding and political theater, the feast that became the myth of the first Thanksgiving. It started as a tense standoff. The Wampanoag, seeing the English had prepared food, saw the opportunity to extend the parley, to ensure the peace held through shared sustenance. They did not bring a covered dish. They arrived with military caution. The English had enough food for their 50 survivors for perhaps a day or two, but 90 additional hungry guests? That was a logistical problem entirely unforeseen. The alliance was tested not by war, but by appetite. Massasoit, realizing the feast would run short, and wanting to display his own wealth and power, dispatched several of his men into the forest. They returned shortly thereafter with 5 deer, large, heavy creatures, butchered and prepared swiftly, a gift of diplomacy. This was the true start of the 3-day harvest event, a political summit disguised as a meal. A military standoff, cooled by shared deer meat. Look into the fire, listener. See the images of those original tense conversations, the flames reflecting in the eyes of the warriors. The pilgrims watched as the Wampanoag cooked the deer, roasted over open fires near the fort. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat mingling. The smoldering logs hiss softly. A deep comfort settles into the scene, despite the underlying tension. We sit here now by our own fire, centuries later, feeling the ancient comfort of the heat, knowing that the warmth we seek was bought by cold political calculus. The myth of easy friendship fades away, replaced by the reality of necessity. The golden glow wraps us tighter. We settle into the silence of the night, ready to witness the final hours of this fragile 3-day event. The long shadows deepen around. The edges of our light. The deer provided by Massasoit fed everyone, ensuring the feast lasted longer than anyone expected. The pilgrims learned more from this accidental gathering than from any formal treaty negotiation. They saw the resilience, the organization, the sheer number of their powerful allies. The Wampanoag saw the struggling nature of the newcomers and confirmed their value as an unstable buffer against rival tribes. They played games. They practiced shooting their muskets for sport now, not threat. The Wampanoag performed traditional dances, a cautious exchange of culture under the cool autumn sky. The fire burns low now. A bed of white ash cradles the glowing red embers. Listen to the wind rustling the dry leaves above us. It whispers of the fleeting nature of peace. The true importance of the 1621 gathering was not the food. It was the recognition of mutual power. The Wampanoag established dominance through numbers and resource provision. The Pilgrims established permanence through their fortified presence and display of gunpowder. The myth tells us of peace and gratitude. The reality was a careful political negotiation held over 3 days of intense scrutiny. The amber light of our fire shows us the truth. It was not Thanksgiving, it was survival. The final day arrived. The Wampanoag warriors prepared to leave. Massasoit had secured his political objective. The English would continue to be his shield against the Narragansett. The Pilgrims had secured their legitimacy. The golden glow of the setting sun matched the last flames of their cooking fires. But the tension did not disappear entirely. It merely settled beneath the surface, like banked coals waiting to reignite. Vatford recorded the event sparsely, a quick note of their success and the generosity of the natives. He knew what this meant for the long term. They were here to stay, and the Wampanoag knew their lives were now irrevocably linked to these strange, difficult newcomers. The fire before us is now utterly peaceful. Only the occasional tiny pop disturbs the calm. A small spark floats up and dies instantly, like the dreams of true, enduring equality that would follow this fragile alliance. We reflect on this crucial turning point, the shift from political deal to permanent cohabitation, the seeds of future conflict already planted. But for this one moment, this brief 3 days, they had survived together. Massasoit returned to his home region, leaving Squanto and Hobbamock to remain near Plymouth. Their duty was to spy, to observe, to protect the alliance. The Pilgrims finished their harvest stores and prepared for the coming cold. The treaty held for 50 years, a testament to Massasoit's careful diplomacy and the mutual advantage of the alliance. But that half-century of peace would eventually collapse. Our bonfire settles into its final deep smoldering phase. The heat is constant but gentle, a perfect warmth for the closing of our tale. Listen only to the soft rush of air over the smooth, hot stones. The ancient shadows are finally still. We rest. In the quiet aftermath of history's most misinterpreted dinner, let the gentle flicker of the embers soothe your mind. Drift now, listener, into the deep comfort of the night. The history is told, the fire guards your rest. The great dark wilderness breathes softly now beyond the circle of our firelight. The air has cooled substantially, sending a fresh shiver through the towering pines. But the warmth of the crackling cedar holds steady right here beside us, a shield against the vast, indifferent night. We watch the fire breathe, a slow, rhythmic pulse of golden glow and deep red amber. Massasoit's alliance was a cold calculation born of necessity, not sentimentality. His people, the Wampanoag, had been devastated by the Great Sickness, a devastating plague that swept through their villages, leaving them weak and vulnerable. Facing the aggressive Narragansett rivals to the west, Bradford and the Pilgrims were not allies in friendship. They were merely leverage, a sudden, useful barrier against a greater threat. The heat of the bonfire feels intense on your left cheek, a dry desert warmth, while the cool draft whispers past your right ear. The duality of the night mirroring the fragility of that 1621 truce. We listen to the dry wood snap a sharp report, sending a fountain of tiny, brilliant sparks dancing up into the inky blackness, where they vanish almost instantly, like forgotten promises. They were both survivors, Massasoit and Bradford, each clinging to their own precarious position, each playing a dangerous game for the future of their people. The smoldering logs beneath the flames sink lower now, transforming from roaring fire to concentrated heat source, a deep bed of glowing embers, the true heart of the fire that holds the warmth for hours to come. Think of Massasoit sitting at that feast, watching the English newcomers, their strange clothes, their awkward attempts at farming, their desperate reliance on Wampanoag knowledge. He saw not equals but dependents, useful pawns in a strategic struggle for regional dominance. The myth tells us of harmony and shared gratitude, but the history tells us of desperation and political maneuvering, a shrewd tactical decision made under immense pressure. Feel the quiet stillness wrap around you like a heavy woolen clunk, the silence broken only by the steady, hypnotic crackle of the flames, licking at the dry cedar. The fire throws ancient shadows that stretch across the ground and climb the trees, shadows that whisper of things unseen, of agreements misunderstood, of futures predetermined by forces far larger than any single person. The golden glow illuminates the rough bark of the logs, revealing the intricate patterns of the wood grain, a map of time and growth captured within the fuel that keeps us warm. Allow your gaze to drift into the deepest of the flame, the liquid heart of the fire, where the orange light seems to pool and move like slow honey. This is where the political bargain was sealed, not with written treaties, but with a shared
plate of wild turkey and deer meat, a gesture of mutual respect under the cold New England sky. The air carries the heavy, sweet scent of pine smoke, a natural incense that lulls the mind, calms the nerves, and pulls your attention deep into the present moment, away from the worries of the world. The embers are turning a magnificent deep ruby red beneath the surface ash, a sign of perfect combustion, of sustained, relentless heat that promises warmth through the longest, darkest hours. The flicker of the firelight is the only movement we truly need to observe now. Mesmerizing dance of illumination and darkness, reflecting the fragile balance of power struck during that difficult autumn. The Narragansett remained a constant threat, a shadow lurking just outside the boundary of the Plymouth settlement, a threat that made Massasoit's alliance with the English essential, even indispensable. He traded knowledge and protection for a temporary buffer zone, a geopolitical shield crafted from the weakness of the settlers. Watch the smoke rise perfectly straight into the clear night air, carrying the essence of the burning wood high above us, towards the distant, silent stars. The sounds of the forest are muted now. The nocturnal creatures moving softly, far away in the surrounding blackness, leaving us safe and undisturbed within our circle of light. The fire reminds us of the continuous cycle of life and destruction, of wood yielding to flame, of necessity dictating survival. Let the deep, steady heat soak into your bones, relaxing every muscle, every fiber of your being, as the truth of that first Thanksgiving settles into your mind, a complex, uncomfortable, historical reality, far deeper than the simple stories we were told. The amber light holds you gently in its embrace, making your eyelids heavy and your breathing. Slow and easy, we drift onward under the silent, watchful majesty of the night. We stay here, sitting close to the warmth, observing the slow, steady decline of the flames into the perfect, peaceful glow of the smoldering embers, safe in the heart of the ancient shadows. The fire has sunk low now, barely licking the air. A deep silence has fallen over the circle. Only the softest sound of the cedar collapsing into ash remains. The fierce orange light that once chased the ancient shadows back into the trees is gone, replaced by a profound, steady golden glow deep. In the heart of the pit, it is pure, smoldering amber now, a slow breath leaving the logs. Feel the intense heat, focused and contained, concentrated warmth that settles deep into your skin, a comforting weight. We have reached the end of the journey, and the bonfire knows it, drawing its strength inward, becoming a dense core of crimson and charcoal. Listen closely to the gentle hiss, the final sigh of the wood surrendering to the earth. We have traced the history of the 1621 gathering, the complex reality of that moment of shared vulnerability between the Wampanoag and the newly arrived English pilgrims. It was not a sentimental feast, beloved listener. It was a political deal, a necessary treaty orchestrated by Massasoit Osamequin to secure an ally against the powerful Narragansett rivals, and sealed by the pilgrims, desperate for survival in that unforgiving land. The golden glow of that initial cooperation, that brief flicker of true mutual need, was the foundation of a fragile peace. But history is long,
and the ember of that alliance was slowly buried under the cold, relentless ash of expansion, the steady, unstoppable arrival of more ships, more settlers, more demands for land. For a time, the treaty held strong. For decades, even the uneasy peace was maintained. Yet the inherent conflict was always there, beneath the surface, like unburnt tinder waiting for a spark. The conflict between two peoples with utterly opposing views of land ownership, of sovereignty, of destiny itself. We must put down the simple children's story now and hold the real history in our hands, heavy and complicated. The initial feast, the 3 days of sharing the bounty of the harvest, was the conclusion of a tactical negotiation, not the beginning of enduring friendship. It marked the end of the immediate crisis, but also the beginning of the long, slow erosion of native power and presence in the land. The fire reflects this truth. The rapid, bright burning of the initial event gives way to the deep, lasting warmth of memory, the knowledge that settles quietly in your mind. Look down at the beautiful, hypnotic flow of the embers. They pulse with a slow, rhythmic beat, deep ruby red, a concentrated sleeping fire. The true Thanksgiving history is messy and human, full of good intentions and inevitable tragedy. It is not a myth of perfect harmony. It is a story of survival, strategic alliances, and the hard choices made by pragmatic leaders caught in a clash of worlds. We leave the council fires of Massasoit and the crowded small houses of Plymouth behind now. Let the whispers of those ancient shadows fade. Let the historical weight lift away. You are sitting here only in the presence of this deep, smoldering warmth, the last vestiges of the cedar fire. Sink deeper into the peaceful silence, the final resting phase. The world is still. Everything outside our circle is quiet, asleep. Feel the profound comfort of the steady heat on your chest. The memory of the blaze, now simply a soft, deep glow, designed only to keep you safe and warm through the long hours of the night. The stories have settled, the history is understood. There is only the peace now, the quiet, the absolute stillness. Let your breathing slow down, matching the long, slow pulse of the ember bed. Inhale the soft, faint scent of the wood smoke, an earthy perfume, a final comfort. We have brought the entire story to rest here in the deepest of the night, in the quietest moment. The true measure of thy gathering, my friend. Rest not in the shared plates of fowl or deer, but in the fragile political truce it represented. It was a contract of necessary survival. Look closely now at the fire. It is yielding its dominance. The bright, fierce yellow has begun to retreat, folding back into itself, leaving behind a core of deep red, smoldering intention. The high dancing flame that once reached for the stars now stays low, licking gently at the charcoal remains. The cedar logs, once vibrant and noisy, are now hushed giants, settled into ash. Feel the change in the air, the immediate heat that, pressed against your cheek, is softening, becoming a diffused residual warmth. The shadows, that ancient darkness we have kept at bay all evening, are creeping closer. They are reclaiming the edges of our circle, blurring the lines between what is memory and what is myth. We reflect on that early alliance, knowing that though it held for a time, the balance was too delicate, too conditional. The golden glow of mutual respect faded much like this light we are watching. The embers tell the silent history that required immense sacrifice and eventual heartbreak. Watch those glowing coals, deep within. The heart of the pit, each one a tiny pulse of stored energy, a pocket of memory waiting to be released. They shift and sigh, producing a sweet, gentle smoke that drifts upward toward the sleeping pines. The sound of the bonfire is almost entirely gone. No sharp crackle, no snapping wood.
Only a soft hiss, a low whisper of heat dissolving into the night. The darkness settles heavy and comforting, a thick velvet blanket pulled high. You can see the final shimmer of the light reflecting off the wood grain of your chair, or perhaps simply in the closure of your mind. This deep amber hue, this rich golden color of true embers, is the color of ancient sleep. It is the final truth, the lasting impression of warmth sustained through the long dark night. Let your gaze relax on these beautiful smoldering remains. They remind us that great energy can reside in stillness, that great power can be held quietly. The ground beneath you feels steady, firm, and warm. The residual heat radiating up through the earth is a final comforting presence. The last wisps of the sweet smoke are dissipating into the high, cold air, leaving behind a perfect quiet. All that remains is the soft, thrumming beat of your own being. The journey through the history and myth of that gathering is now complete. The ancient shadows have been explored and illuminated by the fire, and now they bring peace. I am Nazrullah, and this has been our final quiet hour by the bonfire for YTChronicle. It is time to let the profound stillness of the embers carry you away. Let the warmth sink into your bones. Let the lingering smell of the cedar guide your dreams. Close your eyes now and feel the peace. Let the deep rest arrive. It is earned and it is waiting. Sleep deeply, my friend. Sleep now.